In a world gripped by tension, fragile agreements, and explosive conflict, 5 major stories are rewriting the global order. From economic superpowers retreating from the brink, to deadly airstrikes on schools, and a fragile peace slipping away in Ukraine, this is a pivotal moment. Stay with us as we take you deep inside the world's most pressing headlines. After months of escalating tensions, of tit-for-tat tariffs and fiery rhetoric, the United States and China have stepped back from the economic precipice. In a high-stakes meeting in Geneva, negotiators hammered out a fragile agreement, a rollback of most of the recent trade penalties. This isn't a complete surrender, not a white flag from either side, but a pause, a deep breath in a conflict that threatened to plunge the global economy into chaos. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent didn't mince words, calling the averted tariff hikes the equivalent of an embargo, a stark reminder of what was at stake. And while markets, those fickle barometers of global sentiment, responded with a collective sigh of relief, a surge of optimism pushing indices upward, there's a palpable sense of caution in the air. 90 days. That's the length of the ceasefire, the window of opportunity for negotiators to transform this truce into lasting peace. 90 days for 2 economic titans to find common ground, to bridge the chasm of mistrust and competing interests. The world is watching, holding its breath, wondering if this is the turning point, the moment when confrontation gives way to cooperation. China's Ministry of Commerce, never one for overt displays of emotion, cautiously welcomed the agreement, calling it a step in the right direction. But their words were laced with a familiar steel, a reminder that deep divisions remain. The issues of rare earth minerals, of critical export controls, these are the potential landmines, the flashpoints that could reignite the conflict. Behind the scenes, away from the glare of the cameras and the scrutiny of the press, a different kind of diplomacy was at play. In a sunlit Swiss villa, leaders sat face to face, not across a negotiating table, but in a setting designed to foster dialogue, to build bridges instead of walls. We've seen glimpses of these encounters, handshakes captured in still photographs, the faintest hint of a smile playing on the lips of men who hold the fate of the global economy in their hands. But will these gestures, these nascent bonds, be enough? The clock is ticking. 90 days to determine whether this truce is a prelude to peace or a mere lull in the storm. The world waits and hopes. As the sun sets over the battle-scarred landscape of eastern Ukraine, a different kind of tension grips the world stage. The rhythmic thud of artillery fire, the chilling whine of drones, these are the sounds of a fragile peace unraveling. Europe, caught between its commitment to diplomacy and the chilling reality of renewed conflict, has issued an ultimatum to Russia: enforce a ceasefire by midnight, or face the consequences. The response from Moscow was swift and defiant. Not with words, but with the deafening roar of artillery and the chilling spectacle of Russian military might on full display. While diplomats scramble for a last-minute solution, the reality on the ground tells a different story. A story of shattered ceasefires, of escalating violence, and of a people caught in the crossfire. Amidst the escalating tensions, a glimmer of hope. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, his voice a mix of defiance and weary resignation, announced his willingness to meet with Vladimir Putin in Istanbul. A high-stakes gamble, a desperate bid to bridge the chasm of mistrust and hostility that has plunged the region into chaos. But even as leaders speak of peace, the battlefield tells a different story. Drones, those silent harbingers of destruction, stalk the skies, targeting Ukrainian infrastructure, crippling railways, and sowing terror among the civilian population. In Kharkiv, once a bustling metropolis, the echoes of explosions have become a grim soundtrack to daily life, a constant reminder that the war is far from over. Both Russia and Ukraine, acutely aware of the global audience watching their every move, are engaged in a delicate diplomatic dance, each side vying for the support of the United States, for the favor of a fickle global community. Every statement is carefully calibrated, every action designed to sway international opinion. Europe, caught in the middle of this high-stakes standoff, walks a tightrope between the need for security and the desire to avoid further bloodshed. Sanctions, those blunt instruments of economic warfare, are a double-edged sword, capable of inflicting pain on Russia, but also carrying the risk of blowback, of further destabilizing a region already teetering on the brink. The world holds its breath, watching, waiting, hoping that diplomacy will prevail, that the guns will fall silent. But in the meantime, the clock ticks down to midnight, and the specter of war looms large over the heart of Europe. As news of the US-China trade truce reverberated around the world, the global financial system, that intricate web of interconnected markets and investor sentiment, responded with a collective sigh of relief. Wall Street, that bellwether of global economic confidence, surged, erasing weeks of losses in a frenzy of buying fueled by cautious optimism. Analysts, those seasoned veterans of market swings and economic uncertainty, are calling it a turning point, but with a caveat. This isn't a victory lap, not a signal that the trade war is over, but rather a recognition that the worst-case scenario, the dreaded economic meltdown, has been averted for now. The 90-day window for negotiation, that brief respite from the relentless pressure of tariffs and threats, has injected a much-needed dose of stability into a system teetering on the brink. Treasury Secretary Bessent, speaking from the steps of the Treasury Department, his words measured, his tone cautiously optimistic, emphasized the temporary nature of this truce. This isn't the finish line, he cautioned, but rather a pit stop in a long and arduous race. The message was clear. The pressure is on, both sides need to deliver to translate this fragile détente into a lasting agreement. And while global investors, those masters of risk and reward, scramble to recalibrate their portfolios, to capitalize on this unexpected turn of events, a sense of unease lingers beneath the surface. The fundamental issues that sparked this trade war, the concerns over intellectual property, forced technology transfers, and China's state-sponsored economic model, these haven't disappeared overnight. They are the elephants in the room, the unresolved tensions lurking beneath the surface of this fragile peace. The question on everyone's mind: is this pause in the trade war a sign of progress, a genuine commitment to finding common ground, or is it merely a tactical maneuver, a temporary reprieve designed to buy time and avoid further economic damage? The answer, as is often the case in the world of geopolitics and high-stakes finance, is complex, shrouded in uncertainty. The shockwaves from Monday's announcement, from that hastily arranged press conference in Geneva, where representatives from the world's two largest economies announced a truce in their trade war, weren't confined to the trading floors of Wall Street or the halls of government. This wasn't just about tariffs and trade deficits, about soybeans and microchips. This was about something far more profound, a shift in the global balance of power. In a rare display of unity, of shared purpose, American and Chinese negotiators, men and women who had spent months locked in a battle of wills, agreed to step back from the brink, to dial down the rhetoric, and hit the pause button on a conflict that threatened to unravel decades of economic integration. The world watched and hoped as news of the agreement spread like wildfire, igniting a flicker of optimism in a world increasingly defined by division and discord. Stock markets, those sensitive barometers of global sentiment, reacted with euphoria, surging on the news, erasing weeks of losses in a single day of frenzied buying. Currencies, buffeted by months of uncertainty, stabilized, regaining lost ground as investors regained their appetite for risk. The message was clear. The world craved stability, and this agreement, however fragile, offered a glimmer of hope. But beneath the surface of this newfound optimism, a current of caution remained. This wasn't the end of the trade war, not a decisive victory for either side, but rather a recognition of a shared reality, that both economies were being hurt, that the cost of conflict outweighed the potential benefits. This truce, this pause in hostilities, was a chance to regroup, to reassess, and to hopefully find a path forward that didn't involve economic self-immolation. In Beijing, the response was measured, cautious. Officials welcomed the agreement, but warned against complacency, against any attempt by the United States to unilaterally impose its will. In Washington, the mood was similarly guarded. This wasn't a sign of weakness, officials insisted, but rather a pragmatic decision, a recognition that dialogue was preferable to economic warfare. Even as the world focused its attention on the high-stakes drama of trade wars and diplomatic standoffs, a horrific tragedy unfolded in the skies above Myanmar. A stark reminder that for some, the horrors of conflict are not a distant threat, but a terrifying daily reality. In a remote corner of this Southeast Asian nation, where lush jungles meet rugged mountains, a fighter jet, its engines a chilling drone in the midday heat, unleashed a payload of death and destruction upon an unsuspecting target, a schoolhouse filled with children. The aftermath was unimaginable. At least 20 children, their lives snuffed out in an instant, their dreams reduced to rubble. 2 teachers, their noble calling transformed into a gruesome death watch, also perished in the blast. It was the latest in a long line of atrocities committed by Myanmar's military junta, a regime that has shown callous disregard for human life, for the sanctity of childhood, for the very principles of decency and civilization. The attack on a school in the Sagaing region, a region known more for its ancient temples and verdant rice paddies than for the horrors of war, came without warning, without provocation. There had been no recent fighting in the area, no military targets nearby, nothing to justify the indiscriminate slaughter of innocents. Witnesses, their voices trembling with shock and grief, described the scene with chilling clarity, a lone fighter jet, appearing as if from nowhere, circling overhead, and then the deafening roar as the bombs found their target. The world reacted with horror and condemnation. Human rights groups, their voices hoarse from years of decrying the junta's brutality, called for immediate international intervention, for sanctions, for anything that would stop the bloodshed. But their pleas, like so many times before, fell on deaf ears. The junta, entrenched in power, unmoved by the outpouring of grief and anger, continued its reign of terror, its air campaign unabated. In the shadow of the smoldering ruins of the schoolhouse, a community grapples with unimaginable loss. Parents, their faces etched with a grief so profound it transcends words, clutch photographs of their children, their most precious possessions now painful reminders of what can never be replaced. The lucky ones, those who survived the blast, bear the physical and emotional scars of that horrific day, their young lives forever altered by the capricious cruelty of war. Tonight, we've shown you images of both hope and despair, of moments when the world seemed to hold its breath, teetering between conflict and resolution. We've seen the power of diplomacy, the allure of peace, but also the devastating consequences of unchecked aggression, of indifference to human suffering. The stories we've shared tonight are not isolated incidents. They are interconnected threads in the complex tapestry of our world. A world where economic rivalries, political ambitions, and ancient hatreds collide with devastating consequences. These stories demand our attention, not just as passive observers, but as engaged citizens of a global community. Because in the end, the price of indifference is far too high. It is measured in lost lives, shattered dreams, and a world consumed by fear and violence. And that is a price none of us can afford to pay.